November 3rd, 1960. One trembling mistake nearly destroyed an 18-year-old girl's life. And the man standing in front of her, the most famous man on earth, had the power to crush her completely or save her forever. Sarah Mitchell never forgot the sound the coffee pot made when it slipped from her fingers. Not the crash, not the gasps, not even the screams from the kitchen afterward. What haunted her for the next 50 years was the silence. That horrible half-second when boiling coffee exploded across Elvis Presley's white shirt, and the entire restaurant froze like the world had stopped breathing. Because deep down, Sarah already knew what came next. She was going to lose everything. Las Vegas was alive that morning. Neon lights still glowed weakly against the pale desert sunrise, while exhausted gamblers wandered through casinos like ghosts, searching for luck that had abandoned them hours ago. Cigarette smoke hung in the air. Slot machines rang endlessly. Money moved through the city like blood through veins. And inside the International Hotel restaurant, everyone was nervous. Because Elvis Presley had arrived. Even before he entered the room, people felt it. The energy shifted. Conversations lowered. Forks slowed in midair. A famous person could walk into a room and attract attention. But Elvis? Elvis bent reality around himself. Women stared too long. Men straightened their backs. Employees whispered his name like a prayer they weren't supposed to say out loud. Sarah stood near the coffee station, gripping a tray so tightly her fingers hurt. 18 years old, 6 weeks into her first waitress job, 4 hours of sleep, and now she had to serve the biggest celebrity in America. Perfect. The senior waitresses vanished instantly. One suddenly needed to reorganize silverware. Another disappeared into the kitchen. A third pretended she didn't hear the manager. The manager pointed directly at Sarah. "You, table 7. His eyes narrowed. "And don't embarrass this restaurant." Her stomach collapsed. She nodded even though she could barely breathe. Sarah adjusted her uniform with shaking hands and forced herself toward Elvis's table. Every step felt wrong, too loud, too slow, too awkward. She could feel sweat gathering under her collar. Elvis sat casually with 2 men from his entourage, looking impossibly calm, impossibly handsome beneath the soft restaurant lights. His blonde hair was perfectly styled. His blue eyes carried that strange mix of confidence and sadness people always talked about. But what terrified Sarah most was how human he looked. Not untouchable, not distant. Real. And somehow that made everything worse. Good morning, she stammered. Wonderful, already failing. Elvis looked up and smiled gently. That smile hit her like electricity. "Morning," he said warmly. "How are you today?" Nobody that famous should sound that normal. Sarah nearly forgot how to speak. I'm good. Can I get you gentlemen some coffee?" "Coffee sounds perfect." His voice was smooth and relaxed. No ego, no arrogance, just kindness. That only made Sarah more nervous. Her hands trembled while pouring coffee. One wrong movement and she'd spill it everywhere. Somehow she survived. Barely. She took their orders and escaped toward the kitchen before her knees gave out completely. The cooks laughed softly when they saw her pale face. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Worse," Sarah muttered.
Elvis Presley. One cook smirked. Kid, he's just a man. No, he wasn't. He was Elvis Presley. And Sarah Mitchell's entire future depended on not making a mistake in front of him. Because this wasn't just some job. This paycheck fed her family. Ever since her father died 2 years earlier, everything in the Mitchell household had changed. Her mother sewed clothes until midnight just to keep rent paid. Her younger siblings had learned not to ask for new shoes.
Sarah had given up college without telling most of her friends how badly it destroyed her. She had been accepted into the University of Nevada. Accepted. She still kept the letter hidden in her dresser drawer, like evidence of another life she almost had. A partial scholarship covered some expenses, but some wasn't enough. Not when your father was dead. Not when your mother cried quietly at night, thinking nobody heard her. Not when your little brother pretended he wasn't hungry, so everyone else could eat more. Dreams cost money, and poor families learned early that dreams were dangerous things. So Sarah became a waitress instead of a teacher. And every morning she tried not to think about the future, slowly slipping away from her. "Order up," the cook shouted. Sarah grabbed the tray carefully. Eggs, bacon, toast, coffee. Easy. She'd carried heavier trays before. She steadied herself. One breath, then another. You can do this. She walked toward table 7, step by step. The restaurant noise blurred around her. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She set down the first plate perfectly, then the second. Almost there. Then it happened. Her foot clipped the leg of a chair, just slightly. But exhaustion destroys people in tiny moments. The tray tilted, the coffee pot slipped, and suddenly scalding liquid poured directly across Elvis Presley's chest. The sound that came out of Sarah's mouth barely sounded human. "Oh my God!" The coffee splashed everywhere, across Elvis's white shirt, across the tablecloth, across the floor. Steam rose instantly. Every conversation in the restaurant stopped. Sarah froze. Her brain stopped working. No thoughts, no breathing, nothing. Then panic exploded inside her chest. "I'm sorry. Oh my God, I'm sorry." She grabbed napkins desperately, trying to wipe the stain away, but her hands shook violently. Tears flooded her eyes so fast she couldn't see. This was it. Finished. Gone. Her manager would fire her immediately. Of course he would. She'd humiliated the restaurant in front of the most famous customer they'd ever had. Her family needed her paycheck. Her mother needed her paycheck. And now, because she was stupid and tired and clumsy, Elvis stood quickly from the booth. Not angry, just startled from the heat. Sarah stepped backward, trembling so hard she thought she might collapse. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't be angry." But Elvis wasn't looking at his ruined shirt. He was looking at her. Concern filled his face. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey, calm down. Are you burned?" Sarah blinked. "What? You're asking if I'm okay?" "You're crying harder than I am." The kindness in his voice broke something inside her. Fresh tears spilled down her face. Then came the manager, fast, furious, red-faced. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted. The entire restaurant stared. Sarah's body went cold. "I'm sorry." "You're finished." The manager pointed toward the kitchen. "Get your things and get out." "No, please." "You just dumped hot coffee on Elvis Presley." "I didn't mean to." "I don't care." Sarah's vision blurred. Everything collapsed at once.
No job meant overdue rent. No job meant empty cupboards. No job meant her mother working herself into the grave. Her chest tightened so hard she could barely breathe. "Sir," she begged quietly, "please, my family needs this job." But the manager was beyond caring. Then Elvis Presley spoke. "Stop." One word, quiet but sharp enough to cut through the entire room. The manager immediately fell silent. Elvis stepped forward slowly, coffee stain spreading across his shirt. "Did you just fire her?" Elvis asked calmly. "Over an accident?" The manager forced a nervous smile. "Mr. Presley, I assure you—" "No," Elvis interrupted. "Answer the question." The room felt dangerously still. "Yes," the manager muttered. Elvis stared at him for several seconds. And suddenly the atmosphere changed. Not loud, not explosive. Worse, controlled anger.
"You're firing an 18-year-old girl," Elvis said slowly, "because she made one mistake while exhausted and scared? She ruined your shirt." Elvis looked down briefly, then back at him. "It's a shirt." Silence. "I have closets full of shirts." His voice hardened. "She has one job." The manager swallowed. "She needs this work more than I need dry cleaning." Sarah stared at Elvis in disbelief. Nobody had ever defended her like this before. Nobody. "She embarrassed the restaurant," the manager argued weakly. "No," Elvis said. "You're embarrassing the restaurant." The tension became unbearable. Even the kitchen staff stopped moving. Elvis took another step closer. "You know what I see?" he asked quietly. "I see a terrified young girl who's been crying for 5 straight minutes because she cares about doing a good job." The manager said nothing. Elvis's blue eyes sharpened. "And instead of helping her, you humiliate her in front of everyone." Sarah felt tears sliding silently down her cheeks again. But now they came from something else entirely. Not fear, relief. "People make mistakes," Elvis continued. "You don't destroy them for it." The manager nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Presley. Don't fire her." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, and everyone knew it. The manager forced an ugly smile. "Fine. She can stay." Elvis kept staring at him. "That's not enough." The manager blinked nervously. "What?" "You're going to treat your employees like human beings." No one moved. No one breathed. Because suddenly this wasn't about coffee anymore. It was about dignity, about power, about whether poor people deserved kindness after failing. And Elvis Presley, rich, famous, worshipped by millions, was standing in the middle of a Las Vegas restaurant defending a terrified waitress nobody else would have protected. Sarah would remember that moment for the rest of her life. Not because Elvis was famous, but because for the first time in years, someone saw her pain and cared. Elvis finally turned toward her again. His expression softened instantly. "Sit down for a minute," he said gently. Sarah stared at him in shock. I should work." "You look like you're about to faint." A few nervous laughs rippled through the restaurant. Sarah slowly sat across from him, still trembling. Elvis remained in the stained shirt, like it meant absolutely nothing. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah." "Well, Sarah," Elvis smiled slightly. That was one unforgettable introduction. Despite everything, she laughed through her tears. And in that exact moment, without realizing it, Sarah Mitchell's entire life began to change. The next morning, Sarah Mitchell stood beside the restaurant payphone with trembling hands, and Elvis Presley's business card clutched so tightly it had bent at the corners. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw coffee exploding across Elvis's chest again. She heard the manager screaming, felt the entire restaurant staring at her like she was watching her own execution. But then another memory kept replaying louder than the humiliation. Elvis standing between her and the manager, protecting her, like her dignity actually mattered. Sarah still couldn't understand it. Why would a man like Elvis Presley care about a poor waitress from Las Vegas? Why would he remember her dream? And why, in God's name, had he told her to call his manager? The restaurant buzzed around her with breakfast noise, plates clattering and cooks yelling orders, but Sarah barely heard any of it. Her stomach twisted violently as she stared at the number on the card again. Maybe this was all a joke. Maybe Elvis had simply been trying to calm her down. Maybe Colonel Parker's office wouldn't even know who she was. She almost hung up before dialing. Almost. Then she thought about her mother sewing clothes late at night until her fingers bled. She thought about the university acceptance letter hidden in her drawer, and she forced herself to dial. Each ring tightened the pressure in her chest. Then a rough voice answered. "Colonel Parker's office." Sarah nearly forgot how to breathe. "Hello, my name is Sarah Mitchell. Elvis told me to call." Silence. A long silence. Then, hold. The line clicked. Sarah's heart pounded so hard, she thought the entire restaurant could hear it. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then another voice came through, older, smoother, colder. "This is Colonel Tom Parker." Sarah swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Elvis told me about you." Her knees weakened instantly. He did?" "He said you wanted to become a teacher." Sarah pressed a shaking hand against the wall. "Yes, sir." Another pause. Then the sentence that split her life into two halves forever. "Mr. Presley wants to pay for your education." Sarah stopped breathing. The restaurant noise disappeared. Everything disappeared. "I'm sorry. What?" "Full tuition," Colonel Parker continued matter-of-factly. "Books, supplies, living assistance if necessary. 4 years. Sarah's mind couldn't process the words. No, there must be some mistake." "There isn't." Her legs gave out completely. She dropped into a chair beside the payphone before collapsing. "You'll attend the University of Nevada beginning January 1961, Parker said. "Mr. Presley has already instructed us to arrange everything." Sarah covered her mouth as tears exploded down her cheeks. This couldn't be real. People like Elvis Presley didn't change lives like this. Not for strangers. Not for girls who ruined their shirts. I can't accept this." "Yes, you can." His tone softened slightly. "Elvis was very clear. He believes you deserve a chance." That sentence shattered her, because nobody had said words like that to Sarah in years. You deserve a chance. Not work harder, not life isn't fair, not be realistic. A chance. Sarah cried so hard she couldn't speak. Colonel Parker waited quietly. Finally, she whispered, Why would he do this for me? The answer came immediately. Because he knows what it feels like to grow up poor. Sarah closed her eyes, and suddenly, Elvis Presley stopped feeling untouchable again. For the first time, she understood there had once been a scared young person inside him, too. Someone who knew desperation. Someone who knew humiliation. Someone who knew what it meant to dream while broke. Parker continued, "There's one condition." Fear flashed through Sarah instantly. "What condition?" "You finish school." Sarah blinked. "That's it?" "Elvis doesn't want the money wasted. You maintain good grades. You become a teacher. You build the life you wanted." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered immediately. "Yes, I will." "Good. Someone from our office will contact you about paperwork." The line clicked dead. Sarah sat frozen beside the phone. People moved around her. Customers laughed, plates crashed, coffee poured. But inside her, everything had changed. For the first time in years, the future no longer looked like a locked door. She ran home after work that evening. Actually ran. Straight through the fading Vegas sunlight, past neon signs and crowded streets, and tourists who never even noticed the crying girl sprinting down the sidewalk. When she burst through the apartment door, her mother looked up in alarm. "Sarah, what happened?" Sarah couldn't speak at first. She just held out the business card with shaking hands. "I'm going to college." Her mother frowned in confusion. "What?" "Elvis Presley." Sarah's voice broke. "He's paying for everything." Silence filled the apartment. Absolute silence. Then her mother laughed once in disbelief, then covered her mouth, then started crying. Not quiet tears, violent tears. The kind buried people release when life finally stops hurting for one single moment. Sarah's younger siblings rushed into the room. "What happened? Why are you crying? Is somebody dead?" "No," Sarah sobbed while laughing at the same time. "Nobody died." Her mother grabbed Sarah's face with trembling hands. "Tell me exactly what happened." And Sarah did. Every second. The coffee, the manager, Elvis defending her, the phone call, the scholarship. By the end, all 4 siblings were screaming with excitement. Her little brother actually jumped onto the couch yelling, "My sister's going to college!" Her youngest sister hugged Sarah so tightly she almost fell backward. That tiny apartment, usually heavy with stress and exhaustion, suddenly felt alive. Hope had entered the room again. And hope changes everything. That night, Sarah pulled the university acceptance letter from her dresser drawer. For months, she hadn't been able to look at it without pain. Now her hands trembled for an entirely different reason. She traced her fingers across the paper slowly. University of Nevada. It no longer felt like a cruel joke. It felt real. For the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to imagine the future again. A classroom, children, books, a life bigger than survival. And somewhere far away in another luxury hotel suite, Elvis Presley had made all of it possible, while probably changing into another clean shirt and moving on with his day. That thought hit Sarah hardest of all. Because to Elvis, the act may have lasted 20 minutes. To her, it changed generations. Weeks passed quickly.
The story spread through the restaurant like wildfire. Customers whispered about it. Employees retold it constantly. Some exaggerated parts already. Elvis threatened to buy the whole restaurant. Elvis almost punched the manager. Elvis tipped her $1,000. Most of the rumors weren't true. Reality was simpler and somehow more powerful. Elvis Presley had simply chosen kindness when cruelty would have been easier. That was it. And people couldn't stop talking about it because deep down, kindness that genuine had become rare. The manager barely looked Sarah in the eyes anymore. Whenever Elvis returned to the restaurant, he requested Sarah's section personally. Each time, she became nervous all over again. But Elvis always treated her normally, not like charity, not like a project, like a person. That mattered more than the money. One morning, while refilling his coffee carefully with both hands gripping the pot, Sarah finally asked the question haunting her. "Why did you really help me?" Elvis leaned back slightly. The restaurant lights reflected softly in his blue eyes. "You want to know the truth?" "Yes." He glanced out the window for a moment before answering. "Because I know what hopeless looks like." Sarah stayed silent. Elvis's voice lowered.
When I was a kid, my family had almost nothing. There were nights my mama worried about food, nights we didn't know how bills would get paid. Sarah listened carefully. "You looked at that manager yesterday," Elvis continued, "like your whole world was ending." Because it was, Sarah thought. I recognized that look. The words hit her harder than she expected. Not pity, recognition. Elvis understood her because he had once stood near the same darkness himself. "You know something funny?" Elvis said softly. Sarah shook her head. "People think fame changes everything." He smiled faintly. "But some parts of being poor never leave you." For a second, the mask disappeared. Not Elvis Presley, the superstar, just Elvis. A man carrying old scars nobody could see. Then suddenly he smiled again, lighter this time. "But enough sad talk. You gonna spill coffee on me again today?" Sarah burst out laughing, and Elvis laughed with her. That moment stayed with her forever, too. Because beneath the fame and screaming crowds and money and celebrity, he still made room for scared people to breathe. Months later, January finally arrived. Sarah stood on the University of Nevada campus holding textbooks against her chest while cold wind swept across the grounds. Students hurried past laughing. Cars filled parking lots. Professors crossed sidewalks carrying stacks of papers. Everything felt unreal. She looked around slowly, overwhelmed. I'm actually here. A few months earlier, she'd been serving eggs in a restaurant believing her dreams were dead. Now, she was standing at a university because one man decided her future mattered. But what Sarah didn't know yet was that the hardest part of her journey was still coming. Because hope can save a person, but learning to believe you deserve that hope, that takes much longer. By spring of 1961, Sarah Mitchell was drowning. Not financially, emotionally. Every morning she walked through the University of Nevada campus, feeling like she didn't belong there. The other students looked confident, relaxed, normal. They talked about vacations, fraternities, future careers. They carried themselves like college had always been part of their lives. Sarah carried fear. Fear of failing, fear of disappointing Elvis, fear of wasting the miracle she'd been given. At night, she still worked shifts at the restaurant to help her family. Then she studied until sunrise with burning eyes and aching hands before dragging herself back to class exhausted beyond words. Sometimes she stared at her textbooks so long the words blurred together. And every time she struggled, the same terrifying thought entered her mind. What if the manager was right about me? What if I really am just a clumsy waitress pretending to be something more? That fear poisoned everything. One evening, after failing a difficult education exam, Sarah sat alone in an empty classroom long after everyone else had gone home. Rain hammered the windows outside. Her test paper lay on the desk in front of her. 68%. Failure. Not total failure, but enough to shatter her confidence. Sarah stared at the paper while tears slowly filled her eyes. Maybe she wasn't smart enough. Maybe dreams like hers only sounded beautiful in theory. Maybe poor girls from Vegas restaurants weren't meant to become teachers after all. The pressure inside her chest became unbearable, because this wasn't just about her anymore. Elvis Presley had believed in her, spent money on her, defended her, and now she was failing him too. That thought hurt worst of all. Sarah finally broke. She buried her face in her hands and cried silently in the empty classroom, while thunder shook the building outside. Then she heard footsteps. Her professor stopped beside her desk. Professor Harold Bennett, older man, gentle eyes,
Former elementary school principal. He looked at the failed exam, then at Sarah. "You think one bad test defines you?" he asked quietly. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly. "I'm sorry." "That wasn't my question." She looked down again. I don't know if I belong here." Professor Bennett pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "Do you know how many teachers fail exams while learning?" Sarah shook her head weakly. "Most of the good ones." She frowned slightly. "What?" "Because good teachers care deeply, and people who care deeply panic when they struggle." Sarah stayed silent. The professor leaned back. "The dangerous students aren't the ones crying over failure." He pointed gently at the exam. "The dangerous ones are the people who feel nothing." Those words settled deep inside her. Professor Bennett studied her face carefully. "You've survived things many students here couldn't imagine. Poverty, loss, responsibility, exhaustion." He paused. "That struggle will make you a better teacher someday." Sarah looked unconvinced. He smiled softly. "Children don't need perfect teachers, Miss Mitchell." Another pause. "They need human ones." That sentence changed something inside her. Not instantly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough to stand back up. Enough to keep going. And Sarah Mitchell did keep going. Through sleepless nights, through endless studying, through moments where quitting seemed easier than continuing. She kept moving forward. Because every time life tried to drag her backward, she remembered Elvis standing in front of her manager saying, "She has one job." Not one mistake, one future. And slowly, year after year, Sarah transformed. The terrified waitress disappeared. In her place emerged something stronger. A teacher. By 1965, Sarah graduated near the top of her class. The day she received her degree, her mother cried harder than anyone in the auditorium. Her younger siblings screamed loud enough to embarrass her completely, and Sarah herself could barely hold the diploma because her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear this time, from disbelief. She had done it.
Against every odds stacked against her, she had done it. But the most emotional moment came later that evening, after the celebration ended, after her family fell asleep. Sarah sat alone beside her bedroom window, holding the graduation diploma in her lap. Then, quietly, she wrote a letter.
Dear Elvis, you probably don't remember me.
She stopped there. No, that sounded wrong. She started again.
Dear Elvis, 4 years ago I spilled coffee on your shirt and nearly lost everything. Instead of humiliating me, you gave me a future.
Tears rolled slowly down her face while writing. She told him everything, about graduating, about becoming a teacher, about how his kindness had carried her through the hardest moments. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and mailed it the next morning. Weeks passed, no response. Then months, still nothing. Sarah eventually accepted reality. Of course, Elvis Presley wouldn't personally answer thousands of letters. Still, a small part of her hoped. Life moved forward. Sarah became an elementary school teacher in one of Las Vegas's poorest neighborhoods. The school building was old, underfunded, falling apart in places. But Sarah loved it instantly, because she recognized the children, not their faces, their pain. Kids arriving hungry, kids embarrassed by worn clothes, kids carrying adult burdens behind young eyes. She understood them because she had once been them. And unlike many teachers, Sarah never mistook struggling children for lazy children. She saw fear faster than most people, especially in quiet students. One little boy named Daniel reminded her painfully of herself. He never spoke much, never looked adults in the eye, constantly apologized even when he'd done nothing wrong. One day, another teacher complained about him after class.
That boy has no confidence whatsoever. Sarah looked toward Daniel, sitting alone in the hallway, then quietly answered, Confidence dies early in children who grow up afraid. The other teacher didn't fully understand, but Sarah did, because she remembered exactly how it felt standing in that restaurant, believing one mistake would destroy her entire future. So she treated children differently. When students failed, she helped instead of humiliating them. When they made mistakes, she corrected without cruelty. When they struggled, she listened first. And slowly, her classroom became special. Students who hated school started trying harder. Troubled kids opened up to her. Parents specifically requested her class. Other teachers noticed it too. You make those kids feel safe, one principal told her once. Sarah smiled sadly, because she knew exactly where she learned that from. Years passed, then decades. The world changed around her. Presidents changed. Wars came and went. Music evolved. Las Vegas transformed into something louder and bigger and stranger. And through all of it, Sarah kept teaching. Hundreds of children, then hundreds more. Sometimes during difficult moments, she still thought about Elvis, especially after hearing news about his growing struggles. The fame, the pressure, the loneliness hiding behind the superstar image. It hurt her deeply, because to the world, Elvis Presley was an icon. But to Sarah, he was the man who looked at a terrified waitress and saw possibility instead of failure. Then came 1974, 14 years after the coffee incident. By then, Sarah had almost stopped trying to contact him. But one night, after grading papers until midnight, she sat down and wrote one final letter. Not as a desperate girl this time. As a teacher. As proof his kindness had mattered. She told him about her students, about children escaping poverty through education, about scared kids finding confidence inside her classroom,
about how one act of compassion had echoed through hundreds of lives. Then she mailed it. And this time, a reply came back. Small envelope, simple handwriting. Sarah's hands trembled violently opening it. Inside was a short note. Sarah, I'm glad you became a teacher. The world needs more people like you. Remember what I told you? Everybody deserves a chance. Now you're giving those kids their chance too. That makes me proud. Elvis. Sarah cried for nearly an hour, not because the letter came from Elvis Presley, because after all those years, he remembered her. She framed the note the next day, and for the next 30 years, it hung beside her classroom desk. Students constantly asked about it. Did you really meet Elvis? Why did he write to you? What happened? And every single time, Sarah told the story. Not the celebrity version, the human version. The story about kindness, about mistakes, about dignity, about how one moment can redirect an entire life forever. By the time Sarah retired after 35 years of teaching, she had taught more than 800 students. 800. Some became doctors, some became teachers themselves. Some escaped poverty because somebody once believed in them when nobody else did. During her retirement speech, the auditorium overflowed with former students returning to see her one final time. Adults now, parents now, successful people now. Many hugged her crying before the ceremony even began. Sarah stood at the podium holding Elvis's old letter in trembling hands. Her hair had turned gray long ago, but her voice remained steady. When I was 18 years old, she began softly, I made the worst mistake of my life. The room fell silent. I spilled hot coffee all over Elvis Presley. Laughter spread through the crowd. Then Sarah told the story one final time. The restaurant, the terror, the manager screaming, Elvis stepping between them. Some people laughed, some cried quietly, but by the end, nobody in the room remained untouched. Sarah looked out across the audience filled with former students whose lives had intersected with hers across decades. Then she spoke the words that stayed with many of them forever. Elvis Presley changed my life in 20 minutes. Her eyes glistened with tears. But not because he gave me money. Silence. He changed my life because in my worst moment, he chose compassion instead of anger. You could hear people crying now. Sarah's voice shook slightly. He saw a frightened girl who believed one mistake had ruined her future. She paused, and he decided she was still worth believing in. The auditorium became completely silent. That, Sarah whispered, is real greatness. She looked down at the framed note in her hands, then back at the audience. And every child who ever walked into my classroom benefited from that one decision. Many people openly wept now, because suddenly they understood. This was never just a story about Elvis Presley. It was about the ripple effect of kindness. One compassionate moment, one choice, one person deciding another human being still mattered after failing. That single act had traveled through decades, through classrooms, through children, through families, through lives Elvis Presley himself would never even meet. Years later, after Sarah passed away peacefully in her sleep, former students discovered something written inside her old teaching journal. A sentence she had copied by hand many times over the years. People never forget the moment someone believed in them when they had stopped believing in themselves. And underneath it, in faded ink, she had written one final line. "Thank you, Elvis. You changed the world more than you ever knew."